face a brand new chart for the head and for the heart. It's your journey, your tools.
I want you to just picture the scene for a second. You are standing in your bedroom and you're staring at a pair of running shoes that look, well, suspiciously pristine.
Not a speck of dirt on them.
Exactly. Or, maybe it's a language learning app on your phone that you haven't opened in like 3 weeks. Or one of those beautifully color-coded meal prep containers that is currently holding leftover takeout.
Yeah, the classic graveyard of New Year's resolutions.
It really is. And we have all been there. I mean, you started January with this roaring fire of motivation, right?
Yeah.
You were absolutely convinced that this was the year you were going to fundamentally change who you are. And now fire is just dead.
Completely burned out.
Yeah. And what do we do when that happens? We don't look around and ask, what went wrong with our environment. We look in the mirror and we say, I am weak. I lack discipline. I just didn't want it badly enough.
Which is such a profoundly tragic reaction, really.
It is.
And more importantly, if we're looking at this from a strict clinical neurobiological perspective, it is entirely inaccurate.
Exactly. And that is exactly why we are taking a radically honest, incredibly blunt approach with you today. I mean, think about this. When you take your car to a mechanic because it won't start, the mechanic plugs in a diagnostic tool, reads the code, and says, hey, the alternator is dead.
Right. It's a mechanical failure.
Right. Nobody looks at a broken alternator and accuses it of lacking moral character.
Mm-hmm.
You don't stand there and say the car didn't, want to drive to the grocery store badly enough.
No, because it's a machine. It's constrained by physical laws.
Yes. But the very moment we look at human behavior, we just throw the diagnostic manual right out the window and replace it with guilt.
Well, and we live in an era that is completely saturated with what we call hustle culture.
Ugh, yes. The worst.
It's this pervasive, really toxic positivity that tells you to just, grind it out. The cultural narrative dictates that if you're exhausted, well, you just need to push harder.
Yeah, like your success is just a math equation of how badly you want it.
Exactly. That success in any endeavor is directly proportional to your level of internal motivation.
Mm.
But when you actually read the literature, it tells a completely different story. The advice to just push through isn't just unhelpful.
It's actually damaging, isn't it?
It is catastrophic advice for your brain's architecture.
So today, we are completely dismantling that hustle culture. We've brought a massive stack of clinical neuroscience and behavioral psychology papers into the studio for this deep dive.
Some really phenomenal sources today.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking at Wolfram Schultz's seminal research on how dopamine actually works, Amy Arnsten's incredible work out of Yale on how stress literally destroys parts of your brain, and some really fascinating applied behavioral science on something called friction engineering.
Which is going to blow people's minds, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
And our mission today is simple, right? We are going to extract the cold, hard, biological reality of why you do what you do.
The goal here is to fundamentally change how you view your own actions. By the end of this deep dive, we really want you to understand that, well, motivation is nothing more than a transient chemical state.
It's just chemistry.
It's chemistry. It is a flickering indicator light on your brain's biological dashboard. It is not. And, evolutionary biology guarantees that it was never meant to be a consistent power source for long-term behavioral change.
So we are going to teach you how to stop negotiating with your feelings and start treating your brain like the biological machine it actually is. Because, if you want to fix the output, you have to understand the machinery.
You really do.
And to understand why wanting it isn't enough, we have to start by looking under the hood at the specific neurochemical that our culture just constantly, endlessly misinterprets. We have to talk about dopamine.
Oh, dopamine. It is genuinely staggering how universally misunderstood dopamine is right now.
It's a buzzword, right?
It's the ultimate buzzword. If you read a lifestyle magazine or listen to a self-help guru or, scroll through social media, dopamine is almost exclusively referred to as the pleasure molecule.
Right, like you get a dopamine hit.
Exactly. You constantly hear people talk about getting a dopamine hit when they eat a piece of chocolate or when they see a notification pop up on their phone. The cultural implication is that dopamine is the chemical equivalent of joy or satisfaction, like it is the reward itself.
That it's not.
No. When you look at the clinical literature, particularly studies examining the midbrain dopaminergic system, you realize dopamine has almost nothing to do with pleasure.
So it's not the feeling of eating the chocolate.
No.
It's the feeling of hunting for the chocolate.
Precisely. That is the perfect way to phrase it. Dopamine is a neuromodulator of expectation. It's about prediction and learning. It is the chemical of anticipation. It's the drive that gets you moving toward a perceived reward.
Okay, so if dopamine isn't giving us the pleasure of the reward, what exactly is it doing? How does this connect to that feeling of motivation we all get on, like January 1st?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the core mechanism of motivation, which the neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz beautifully defined through what is called the reward prediction error hypothesis, or RPE for short.
Okay, reward prediction error. Let's break that down.
So the dopamine neurons we are focusing on are located deep in the primitive parts of your midbrain, specifically in areas called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, and the substantia nigra.
Deep in the old hardware of the brain.
Exactly. And these neurons are fascinating because they do not fire based on the absolute value or the size of a reward you receive.
Wait, really?
Really, they fire based exclusively on the surprise element of that reward.
Okay, so they're essentially calculating the gap between reality and expectation.
Yes. Your brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. It is constantly making these tiny subconscious bets about what is going to happen next in your environment. And the dopamine neurons are calculating the difference between what you predicted would happen and what actually happened.
Right, and the clinical literature often describes this with like a really complex algebraic formula regarding temporal difference learning, but
Yeah, we don't need to do the math today.
no, let's definitely translate that into something that actually makes sense for the listener. Schultz did these incredible experiments, but he also had a brilliant way of illustrating this concept outside the lab using a story about a Japanese vending machine.
Oh, such a great analogy.
Walk us through that because I think it perfectly captures what's happening in our heads when we start a new habit.
It really does. Okay, so imagine you are a tourist visiting Tokyo for the first time.
Okay, I'm in Tokyo.
You're walking down a neon-lit street, you're incredibly thirsty, and you stand in front of a drink dispenser. But the entire machine is covered in Japanese characters. You can't read a single word of it.
I have no idea what I'm looking at.
Right. And you have a very specific craving. Let's say you really, really want a blackcurrant juice.
Yeah.
But looking at this machine, you have a very low expectation of actually getting it. You figure you have maybe a 1 in 10 chance of guessing the right button.
So my expectation of a reward is basically sitting at 0. I am completely in the dark.
Exactly. Your expectation is low. So you reach out, you press a totally random button, the machine whirs, a can drops down, you open it, and incredibly, it is the exact perfect blackcurrant juice you were craving.
The skies open up, the angels sing.
Yes. Now, in that exact millisecond, your reality has massively exceeded your expectation.
Because I thought I was getting nothing and I got exactly what I wanted.
Exactly. And this creates what neuroscientists call a positive prediction error. Because you were completely surprised by this positive outcome, your VTA dopamine neurons fire in a massive, rapid, high-frequency burst. This is known as a phasic dopamine spike.
Phasic dopamine spike.
Okay.
And subjectively, to the person standing on the street holding the juice, what does that spike actually feel like?
It feels like pure electric motivation. It feels like a fresh start. It's a massive surge of arousal and focus. But, and here's the critical part, the feeling is not a reward.
It's not a reward.
No. That dopamine spike is a teaching signal.
Oh, wow.
It is your brain flooding your nervous system with a chemical highlighter, physically wiring your brain to say, pay extremely close attention to what you just did. Remember the exact location of this machine. Remember the exact color of the button you pressed, because we need to do that again.
So it's basically the biological mechanism of learning a new behavior.
Precisely.
Okay, so that totally explains January 1st.
Great.
We buy the new gym clothes, we download the new language app, we have this vivid vision of a new life, and boom, we get a massive positive prediction error.
You get that high-frequency dopamine spike.
Right. And it feels amazing. We think, I am finally a disciplined person. I'm cured. And here is the trap that catches literally everyone listening to this, what happens on day 2. Or like day 12, let's go back to Tokyo. It's the next day. I'm thirsty again. I walk up to that exact same vending machine.
This is where the biology turns against our cultural expectations. On day 2, you know exactly which button to press.
Right.
You press it, the can drops, you open it, and it's your blackcurrant juice.
So I got the reward. I should get the motivation right.
Wrong. Because this time, your expectation matched reality perfectly. The prediction error is zero.
Zero prediction error.
You expected juice, you got juice, there was absolutely no surprise. And because the prediction error is zero, those midbrain dopamine neurons remain absolutely quiet. They stay at their baseline activity level. There is no spike, there is no rush of motivation. You get the delicious juice, but chemically, the thrill is completely gone.
The brain literally withdraws the neurochemical incentive because the teaching moment is over. It says, okay, we've successfully learned this routine. I'm not wasting any more spark plugs on this.
That's precisely it. It's highly efficient. And we can actually take it one step further. What if it's day 3 and somebody restocked the machine incorrectly? You walk up, you press the button, you now expect we'll give you black currant juice, the can drops, you take a sip, and it's cold, unsweetened black coffee.
I would be devastated, honestly.
And your brain would reflect that. That is a negative prediction error. Reality is suddenly worse than your expectation. When this happens, your dopamine firing doesn't just stay flat. It actually drops significantly below its normal baseline. It essentially pauses.
Wow.
And subjectively, you experience this drop as profound frustration, aversion, and a sudden, overwhelming desire to just abandon whatever task you are doing.
That completely reframes how we view our own failures. I mean, motivation is basically a spark plug in an engine, right? It provides the initial explosive combustion needed to get the heavy pistons moving when you are learning a brand new behavior.
Yes, exactly, to overcome that initial inertia.
Right. But if you try to drive the car from New York to Los Angeles running on nothing but the starter motor and the spark plugs, you are going to burn out the ignition system before you even leave the driveway.
That is a brilliant biological analogy, really. That rush you feel when you declare a new goal is biologically designed by millions of years of evolution to last for seconds, maybe minutes. It is a rapid, hot state.
And long-term goals take months or years.
Right, so the daily grinding execution of a long-term goal doesn't run on those explosive phasic spikes. It runs on tonic dopamine.
Tonic dopamine.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is the slow, steady background pacemaker level of the chemical in your brain.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, or at least speak for the listener who is currently feeling very judged by the fitness influencers on their feed.
Go for it.
If a zero prediction error just means we've successfully learned a routine, if it just means our brain has mapped the environment and made it predictable, why does our culture treat that resulting feeling of boredom as a moral failure?
Oh, it's so backwards.
Right. Why do we look at someone who loses enthusiasm for their diet and say you lack discipline when their brain is literally just doing exactly what it evolved to do?
Because society has profoundly confused a transient neurochemical teaching signal with a permanent character trait.
Oh, that's good. Say that again.
We have moralized biology. Feeling unmotivated by a predictable routine is a mathematical certainty. Your brain is, above all else, an energy-conserving machine. Once it can perfectly predict an outcome, it actively refuses to waste precious metabolic energy generating a dopamine spike.
It's just being efficient.
Exactly.
Weird.
So if you are relying on a feeling of motivation to execute a daily task, you are guaranteeing your own failure because the feeling is chemically programmed to disappear the very moment the task becomes a habit.
So we're already fighting this steep uphill battle against our own evolutionary wiring.
Very steep.
But it gets so much worse when we look at the modern environment, because the sources we're looking at today dive deep into this terrifying concept called the anti-reward state.
Yes. This is crucial.
Because it's not just that motivation naturally fades, right? It's that the world we live in is actively destroying our capacity to feel motivated by normal, healthy effort.
We are currently living in an environment saturated with superstimuli. Hyperpalatable processed foods, constant push notifications, video games, and most notably, the infinite scroll of social media.
Oh, the doom scroll.
The doom scroll. When you are scrolling on your phone, you are not just looking at pictures. Every single swipe of your thumb is a tiny, randomized reward prediction error.
Because you don't know what's coming next.
Exactly. You swipe, you see something boring, negative error. You swipe, you see the mildly funny meme, zero error. You swipe, you see an outrageous, highly engaging video, massive positive prediction error.
Phasic dopamine spike.
It's literally a slot machine in your pocket. It is the exact same mechanism.
You are just hammering the dopamine button over and over and over again. I mean, think about where your phone is sitting right now as you listen to this. How many times have you reached for it today just to feel something?
And that constant hammering leads to a highly destructive neuroadaptation. When you constantly flood your brain with these cheap, unearned phasic dopamine spikes. Your brain recognizes that the system is being overloaded.
It's too much electricity.
Right, and it attempts to protect itself from neurotoxicity and overstimulation. And the way it protects itself is by physically downregulating its dopamine receptors.
So it's like if you walk into a room with blindingly bright lights, you put on sunglasses to protect your eyes. Your brain puts on chemical sunglasses.
That's a great way to visualize it. To be slightly technical, it reduces the actual number of available D2 receptors on the postsynaptic neurons.
Okay, D2 receptors.
Yeah, the brain simply hides the catchers so the dopamine can't bind to them.
But the terrifying consequence of that is your baseline for feeling okay gets completely warped.
That is the anti-reward state. Your brain has lowered its baseline for feeling good just to survive the phone scrolling. But now, you put the phone down and you try to do something that requires sustained effort.
Like real life.
Like real life. You try to take out the trash or cook a healthy dinner or go for a 30-minute jog. Because your receptors are downregulated, that normal, healthy baseline activity doesn't just feel slightly boring. It feels physically and emotionally impossible.
You just feel exhausted.
You feel exhausted. You aren't being lazy.
Yeah.
Your nervous system has literally, physically reduced its capacity to process the chemical that makes effort feel worthwhile.
Okay, this is a massive paradigm shift. If I am struggling to get off the couch to go to the gym, it's not because I'm a bad person.
Not at all.
It's because my dopamine spark plug is mathematically guaranteed to fade, and my modern environment has likely damaged the receptors anyway. The fuel is totally unreliable.
Completely unreliable.
So if we can't use motivation, what do we use? We have to look at the actual structural hardware the brain relies on to get things done when the feelings vanish. We need to talk about the battery versus the engine.
Yes. This is where we transition from the neurochemistry of feelings to the bioenergetics of action.
I love that phrase, bioenergetics of action.
If we pull back and look at the brain's overall architecture, we are really talking about two vastly different regions competing for control over your behavior. You have the prefrontal cortex, which we will call the battery.
The battery, okay.
And you have the basal ganglia, which is the engine. And the extreme disparity in how these two regions consume physical energy dictates almost everything about human success and failure.
All right, let's unpack the battery first.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex, or the PFC, this sits right behind your forehead, right?
Yes, the very front of the brain.
This is the seat of executive function. It is logic, it is planning, it is willpower, it's top-down reflective control. So when you are staring at a menu and you say, I'm going to skip the bacon cheeseburger and order the grilled chicken salad because I want to lower my cholesterol, that is your prefrontal cortex doing the heavy lifting.
It is. It is the absolute pinnacle of human cognitive evolution. It allows us to simulate the future and delay gratification.
Which is amazing.
It is amazing.
Okay.
But it comes with a massive, almost debilitating biological cost. The PFC is incredibly fragile, and it is overwhelmingly metabolically expensive.
Let's give the listener some context on that. How expensive are we talking?
Well, the human brain as a whole makes up only about 2% of your total body weight.
Right.
Yet it consumes a staggering 20% of your resting metabolic energy.
Wow. 2% of the mass, 20% of the fuel.
It's an energy hog. And when you engage in what we call goal-directed cognition, when you are actively using willpower to resist an impulse, or when you are forcing yourself to focus on a difficult spreadsheet at work, that energy demand spikes even higher. The prefrontal cortex requires heavy, continuous streams of actual physical glucose and oxygen to function.
So it really is a literal battery. I mean, every single time you make a decision, every time you bite your tongue instead of yelling at your kids, every time you force yourself to go for a run when it's raining, you are draining this physical battery.
You are. You are experiencing what psychologists call ego depletion and cognitive fatigue.
But wait, why does it have to be so draining?
Well, here is the kicker. Your brain inherently despises this.
It despises using the PFC.
Yes. Evolution has wired the human animal for an environment of chronic caloric scarcity. For thousands of years, food was incredibly hard to find.
Right, we were hunter-gatherers.
Exactly. So from an evolutionary standpoint, burning massive amounts of precious glucose just to ponder your 5-year plan or to resist eating a high-calorie sugary treat, that is perceived by the ancient parts of your brain as a dangerous, life-threatening waste of resources.
So your brain is basically a highly conservative accountant. It's looking at the ledger and screaming, why are we spending all our fuel on this diet thing? Turn the power off.
That's exactly it. The brain wants to offload these expensive cognitive tasks to a cheaper system as quickly as humanly possible.
Which brings us to the engine, the basal ganglia.
Yes.
Now, this isn't right behind the forehead.
Yeah.
These are evolutionarily ancient structures buried deep in the center of the brain, right?
Deep down. The striatum, the putamen, the caudate nucleus.
And these structures specialize in one thing, automating repeated behaviors. It is bottom-up reflexive control.
The absolute beauty of the basal ganglia is its breathtaking efficiency. Once a routine or a habit is heavily encoded into these structures through repetition, executing that routine requires near-zero conscious attention. But more importantly, it requires significantly less metabolic energy. It operates entirely outside of the fragile, expensive prefrontal cortex.
I love analogies, and I think of it like this. The prefrontal cortex is like a top-of-the-line smartphone playing a 4K video over a weak cellular connection with the screen brightness turned all the way to maximum.
It's doing a lot.
It is doing incredible, complex, beautiful work, but it will drain the battery to zero in a matter of hours. You will be left with a dead brick.
Exactly.
The basal ganglia, on the other hand, is like an automatic mechanical watch on your wrist. It doesn't need to be plugged into a wall. It doesn't have a battery that dies. It just runs quietly, relentlessly in the background, powered by the ambient kinetic movement of you simply walking around living your life.
That perfectly captures the bioenergetic difference. The efficiency gap is huge.
But if that's true, I have a major bone to pick with how we talk about success in our culture. Yeah. If the basal ganglia engine is so much more efficient and reliable, why do we stubbornly, constantly try to use the smartphone battery to force ourselves to do things? Why do we idolize people who use sheer willpower to diet or exercise? Why is grinding it out seen as a badge of honor?
That raises a really fascinating point about the human ego.
The ego.
Yeah. Humans naturally overvalue conscious intent. We desperately want to believe that we are the rational captains of our own ship, steering through the stormy seas of life by the sheer magnificent force of our conscious decisions.
We like to feel like we're in control.
Exactly. We feel a deep sense of pride when we power through something using the prefrontal cortex. It feels heroic.
It's a great story to tell at a dinner party. You know, I forced myself to run a marathon. Nobody wants to say I just mechanically jogged because my basal ganglia made me.
Right, but from a strict bioenergetic standpoint, your brain thinks your ego is being an idiot. Your brain is actively trying to take the steering wheel away from the PFC because it's too expensive. True discipline, therefore, isn't about having a bigger, tougher battery. It's not about punishing yourself more.
So what is it?
True discipline is about executing a successful handoff strategy. It is the art of moving a desired behavior out of the fragile PFC battery and hardwiring it into the high-efficiency basal ganglia engine so you no longer have to actually think about doing it.
And we desperately, urgently need that handoff strategy because the reality is the PFC battery doesn't just drain slowly from normal everyday decision-making. It has a fatal flaw.
A very fatal flaw.
Under pressure, it actively collapses. This is where the science gets slightly terrifying, honestly. Let's move into what the clinical literature calls the collapse.
Yes.
Because I want the listener to picture this. You used your willpower to eat well all day. You're doing great. And then at 4 p.m., your boss sends you a highly critical, passive-aggressive email.
We've all been there.
Or you look at your bank account and realize you can't make rent. Or you only slept 4 hours because your toddler was sick. What actually physically happens to this fragile battery when real life hits you in the face? Does it just slowly drain, or does it break?
It breaks. And the work of Dr. Amy Arnston at Yale is incredibly illuminating here.
Let's talk about her research.
She has spent years researching stress signaling pathways in the prefrontal cortex. What her lab has found is that exposure to chronic or uncontrollable stress completely alters the chemical environment of the brain. When you get that bad email from your boss, your brain is flooded with catecholamines, specifically massive tidal wave amounts of dopamine and noradrenaline.
Wait, hold on. Dopamine again.
Yeah.
But I thought we just spent 20 minutes talking about how we wanted dopamine for motivation. Why is dopamine suddenly the bad guy in this scenario?
This is a fantastic question, and it all comes down to what neuroscientists call the inverted U curve of arousal.
Okay, the inverted U.
Imagine a graph shaped like an upside-down U. A little bit of catecholamine release, like the stress of a manageable deadline, pushes you up the left side of the curve. It's great. It wakes the prefrontal cortex up, it helps you tune out distractions, and it focuses your attention.
Like drinking a cup of coffee.
Exactly. That's optimal performance at the top of the curve. But a massive flood of these chemicals, which happens during acute emotional distress or chronic, grinding life stress, that pushes you right off the cliff on the other side of the U.
It's like watering a house plant, right? A cup of water makes it grow. A fire hose blasts it completely out of the pot.
That is exactly what happens at a receptor level. Massive, uncontrollable stress completely overstimulates the receptors in the PFC. And when this happens, it acts as a literal chemical kill switch.
A kill switch.
The overstimulation severs the network connections within the prefrontal cortex. The neurons that usually communicate to keep you calm and rational literally stop firing together. The entire network goes offline. Your battery isn't just drained, it has been forcibly disconnected from the machine.
And what blew my mind reading these sources is that it's not just a temporary software glitch. It's not just that you're having a fuzzy brain day. There is actual physical architecture changing in your head when you are stressed.
Yes, and this is crucial to understand. Chronic exposure to stress hormones, particularly cortisol, causes structural damage. It causes what is known as dendritic shrinkage in the prefrontal cortex.
Dendritic shrinkage. Paint that picture for us. What does that actually look like inside the brain?
Well, imagine the neurons in your brain are like trees, and they communicate with each other by reaching out their branches to touch the branches of neighboring trees. Those branches are the dendrites.
Okay, got the trees?
Under chronic stress, the toxic chemical environment causes those branches to literally shrivel up and retract.
Oh, that sounds awful.
They pull away from each other. The tiny connections that catch the neurotransmitters just disappear. Your brain's communication network physically withers. And this structural shrinkage profoundly impairs your working memory, your cognitive flexibility, and your ability to regulate your emotions.
So when you are stressed out of your mind and you literally can't remember where you put your keys, or you can't figure out a simple problem at work, it's not just that you're distracted, it's because the branches in your brain are physically pulling away from each other.
Precisely.
Mm.
The physical network is compromised. And the sources also highlight another fascinating and really terrifying biological response to fatigue called local sleep.
Yes, I need you to explain this because when I read this in the papers, I realized it explains so many arguments I've had in my life. What is local sleep?
It's wild. Under extreme cognitive fatigue, when your PFC battery is completely depleted by decision fatigue or lack of physical sleep or chronic stress, the neurons in your frontal lobes begin to show slow-wave electrical activity.
Cell wave activity.
Which is the exact electrical signature of deep sleep.
You aren't in bed.
No. You are physically awake, your eyes are open, you are sitting at your desk looking at a spreadsheet, or you are driving your car down the highway, or you're having a conversation with your spouse. But the self-control, logic, and reasoning centers of your brain are literally biologically asleep. They are offline. And this leads to profound lapses in judgment, bizarre emotional outbursts, and a complete collapse of willpower.
Okay, so if the prefrontal cortex has physically shriveled up, or the network has been severed by a panic attack over a boss's email, or the neurons are literally taking a nap while my eyes are open, who is driving the car?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If my logic center is gone, what part of my brain is making the decisions?
That is what we call the amygdala hijack. When the top-down rational control of the PFC drops offline, the brain doesn't just stop functioning. It instantly defaults to its most primitive, bottom-up systems to keep you alive.
Survival mode.
Exactly. The amygdala, which is the alarm bell of the brain that processes fear and raw emotion, takes over your immediate emotional reaction. And for physical behavior, the brain hands the steering wheel directly, without asking your permission, to the basal ganglia.
The habit engine. So I want to connect this to something we hear all the time. When people in the military or first responders or elite athletes say, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training.
Ah, yes.
I always thought that was just a cool macho bumper sticker, a motivational quote. But based on what you're saying is that actually a literal peer-reviewed biological description of the prefrontal cortex shutting down and handing execution over to the basal ganglia.
It is a precise neurobiological fact. Under severe stress, your brain believes you are in mortal danger. It prioritizes immediate survival and massive energy conservation. It looks at the slow, expensive, logical PFC and says, We don't have time or energy for you to debate the pros and cons of this situation.
It just bypasses it.
It bypasses the logic center entirely. And here's the brutal truth for the listener. If you have not automated good, healthy, productive habits into the basal ganglia through relentless, boring repetition when you are calm, you will inevitably default to whatever low-energy, maladaptive habits were previously stored there.
So if my default habit when I'm tired is to isolate myself, or to scroll on TikTok for 3 hours, or to eat an entire box of cookies, when my boss yells at me and my PFC shuts down, I am biologically predetermined to eat the cookies.
Yes.
I literally cannot use willpower to stop it because the willpower battery is disconnected.
Exactly. The basal ganglia will simply execute whatever program requires the least amount of effort. It blind plays whatever tape is already loaded in the machine.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the person listening right now? Because we have just painted a remarkably bleak picture of the human condition.
It is a bit grim, I admit.
I mean, we've established that motivation is a biological illusion that is guaranteed to fade. We've established that our willpower battery is tiny, it burns fuel like crazy, and it physically shrivels up and falls asleep the second we get stressed.
All true.
We absolutely fundamentally cannot rely on trying harder. Trying harder is a biological dead end. So what do we do?
Well, if we accept that the brain is an energy-conserving machine that will inevitably choose the path of least resistance when executive function is low, which is a biological certainty, then the only logical intervention left to us is to deliberately change the terrain.
Change the terrain.
Right. We cannot change the fact that water flows downhill.
Yeah.
But we can dig a different trench for the water to flow into.
I see.
And this brings us to the physics of behavior, a concept known as friction engineering.
Friction engineering. I absolutely love that term. It sounds so much more clinical, so much more effective than trying to be a better person.
It removes the emotion entirely.
Yes, it is about designing your physical and digital environment to artificially increase the resistance, the physical friction for bad habits, and completely eliminate the friction for necessary actions.
That's exactly it. You are manipulating the physics of your immediate environment. And the behavioral science literature draws a really crucial distinction here that we need to unpack, the difference between choice architecture and stimulus control.
Okay, let's break those down. What is choice architecture?
Choice architecture is about manipulating the environment at a systemic level, without assuming the person interacting with it has any pre-existing habits at all. You are setting up the default rules of the game.
Give me an example.
The classic textbook example of this is organ donation rates across different countries. If you look at nations that use an opt-in default, meaning when you go to get your driver's license, you have to actively read a paragraph and check a box to become an organ donor. The donation rates are often dismally low, sometimes hovering around 15 or 20%.
Right, because checking that box requires the prefrontal cortex. It requires you to stop, read, simulate your own death, make a moral decision, and take a physical action.
Which is high friction.
It costs metabolic energy. Leaving the form blank requires zero energy.
Exactly. But if you look at countries that use an opt-out default, meaning you are automatically enrolled as an organ donor by the government, and you have to check a box to leave the program, the donation rates skyrocket to 90 or 95%.
That's a massive difference.
It's huge. And the people in these different countries aren't morally distant. They aren't more or less motivated. The choice architects simply engineered the environment so that the highly desired outcome became the path of absolute least resistance. The lazy option saves lives.
Okay, so that's choice architecture on a macro level.
Yeah.
What is stimulus control? How do I use that in my house?
Stimulus control leverages your existing hardwired habits. Let's use a grocery store example. If researchers track the habitual paths that shoppers take through a supermarket, they know exactly where people instinctively walk.
The perimeter, usually.
Right. If the goal is to get people to buy and eat more fresh fruit, they don't just scatter fruit randomly around the store and put up signs saying eat healthy. That relies on the shopper's prefrontal cortex to care.
Which, if they are shopping after work, is already dead.
Exactly. Instead, they use stimulus control. They physically place the beautiful, bright displays of fruit precisely in the high-traffic bottlenecks where the shoppers are already predictably walking.
They just put it in the way.
Yes. They intersect an existing mindless walking routine with a new environmental cue. You don't have to decide to go find the fruit. The fruit is simply in your way.
And the data on how sensitive the human brain is to even microscopic amounts of friction is staggering. It is almost embarrassing to read as a human being.
It really is.
I mean, the sources highlight that adding just a 20-second delay to a behavior decreases follow-through by 300%. Let me say that again for the listener. 20 seconds of inconvenience makes you 3 times less likely to do something.
It's wild.
They found that a 10-second delay in being able to access a social media app reduces usage by 22%. Just 10 seconds.
It proves unequivocally that we are deeply biologically reactive to the immediate physical constraints of our environment. The brain is constantly doing a subconscious energy audit.
An energy audit.
Yeah. If you want to stop mindlessly watching television every night, do not sit on the couch with the remote on the coffee table and try to use willpower to not turn it on. You will lose.
You will lose every time.
Every time. Instead, unplug the television from the wall, take the batteries out of the remote, and put the remote in a closet in another room.
It sounds ridiculous, but it works.
It works because when your exhausted brain says, hey, let's watch TV, it runs the energy audit. It evaluates the metabolic cost of standing up, walking to the closet, finding the batteries, putting them in the remote, walking to the TV, reaching behind the console, plugging it into the wall.
And the basal ganglia literally overrides the desire and says, you know what? That is way too much metabolic effort. Let's just sit here on the couch or maybe pick up that book that's already sitting right next to us.
Exactly. You engineered the friction.
Conversely, if you want to become someone who works out in the morning, you have to ruthlessly eliminate all friction. You don't wake up at 6 a.m. and start looking for clean socks in the dark.
No, because that requires the PFC.
And the PFC is asleep. You lay out your gym clothes the night before, and you put them directly in the physical path between your bed and your bathroom door. You literally make it so that stepping over the gym clothes requires more physical effort and balance than simply putting them on.
There's also a brilliant neurobiological concept tied to this called the implicit nudge. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Making a behavior more physically effortful doesn't just make it harder to do. It actually changes how your brain neurologically perceives the reward itself.
Wait, really? The actual perception of the reward changes?
Yes. A classic example is a jar of cookies. If you take a clear glass jar of chocolate chip cookies from your kitchen counter, right where you can reach it, and you move it to a high shelf in the pantry behind some cans of soup, it's not just that it takes more physical effort to retrieve them. The brain's subconscious utility calculator actually recalibrates. Because the energy cost to retrieve the cookies has increased, the brain downgrades the value of the reward. The cookies literally appear less appetizing, less tempting to the brain's reward system because the math no longer makes sense.
That is wild. It's like shipping costs. I will put a $50 item in my online cart, but if I see a $5 shipping fee, suddenly I don't want the item anymore.
Yes.
The item didn't change, but the friction changed my desire for it.
Exactly. Your brain is running that shipping cost calculation on every single action you take.
So, synthesizing all of this, it sounds like we need to fundamentally stop viewing take the easy way out as a character flaw. We need to stop calling it laziness, and we need to start actively weaponizing our own laziness.
Weaponized laziness. I like that.
If I know unequivocally that I'm going to be a completely exhausted, biologically compromised, lazy couch potato at 7 p.m. after a brutal day of work, I should not try to fight my biology at 7 p.m.
The battle is already lost by then.
Exactly. I should design my living room at 7 a.m. so that the absolute laziest option available to me at 7 p.m. is reading a book instead of watching TV.
You are hitting on the absolute core of environmental design. Behavioral economists have a saying, the environment is the default option to which you are assigned. The secret to discipline is that you must pre-decide for your exhausted future self. You use your prefrontal cortex when it is fully charged, like in the morning after a good cup of coffee, to design a physical environment that will seamlessly catch you like a safety net when that battery inevitably dies later in the day.
Okay, let's bring this all together. Let's build a clinical toolkit for the listener right now. We know the neurobiology of dopamine makes our feelings completely unreliable. We know the prefrontal cortex is a fragile battery that shrivels under stress, and the basal ganglia is a resilient automated engine.
Right.
And we know the physics of friction dictate that our behavior will always follow the path of least resistance. So how do we actually build what the sources call a mood-independent system?
A mood-independent system is the holy grail of behavioral change. It is an architecture of daily life that functions perfectly, regardless of whether you feel motivated, whether you are exhausted, or whether you are highly stressed.
It bypasses feelings entirely.
Entirely. And the primary, most effective tool for building this architecture into the basal ganglia is something called habit stacking.
I love habit stacking. The formula for it is incredibly simple, but the biology behind it is profound. The formula is basically, after I do my existing anchor habit, I will immediately do my new micro habit.
Yes, and the reason it works so well is deeply tied to the neurobiology we've been discussing. Think about your morning routine, making your bed, brushing your teeth, turning on the coffee maker.
The things you do on autopilot.
Right. These are your anchor habits. They already possess heavily myelinated, highly efficient, thick neural pathways established deep in your basal ganglia. You don't have to motivate yourself to brush your teeth. It requires zero willpower.
Right, it's just what happens when I walk into the bathroom.
Exactly. So by piggybacking a new, very small habit directly onto the end of that anchor habit, for example, after I put my toothbrush back in the holder, I will immediately do one stretch. You completely bypass the need to make a decision.
You eliminate the remembering phase and the deciding phase.
Yes.
Which are the exact two phases that drain the prefrontal cortex battery. You don't have to ask, when should I stretch today? Or do I feel like stretching? You just latch the new, tiny train car onto a massive locomotive that is already moving rapidly down the track.
Precisely. But the critical, non-negotiable key here is consistency over time, not the intensity of the action. The literature frequently points to the 66-day rule.
Not the 21-day rule.
No, the old myth that it takes 21 days to build a habit is largely fiction. On average, across a wide population, it takes roughly 5 to 8 weeks, around 66 days, of consistent, unbroken daily repetition for a new behavior to become fully encoded as an automated routine in the basal ganglia.
You are literally wrapping physical insulation called myelin around the neural pathway, and that takes time.
It takes time and repetition.
Which brings us to perhaps the most vital and most controversial concept in this entire deep dive, the minimum baseline routine, the MBR.
Oh, the MBR is everything.
Break it down for us.
The MBR is the non-negotiable floor of your daily behavior. It is the absolute bare minimum you commit to doing every single day, no matter what is happening in your life. And the critical rule of the MBR, the rule that everyone gets wrong, is that it must be so completely frictionless, so ridiculously easy, that you can successfully execute it on your absolute worst, most stressful, most exhausted day.
Okay, I have to push back on this, or at least get a reality check, because this is where hustle culture really screams at us.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Let's use fitness as an example. If I go online right now and tell a grindset influencer that my minimum baseline routine for getting in shape is doing literally one single push-up a day after I brush my teeth, just one, they would laugh me off the internet.
They absolutely would.
They would say, I'm making excuses, that one push-up doesn't tear muscle fibers, that it doesn't burn calories, and that to see results, I need to be in the gym for 2 hours, sweating blood and crying.
Because they are focused on the physical muscle, not the brain.
Right. So from a strict, cold neuroscience perspective, looking closely at the basal ganglia, is that one push-up actually doing more for my long-term success than the brutal 2-hour workout?
This is such an important distinction, and it raises a fundamental question about what we are actually trying to build here. Are you trying to build muscle today, or are you trying to build a lifelong neural circuit that guarantees you will exercise for the rest of your life?
Wow.
From a neurobiological perspective, intensity does not build habits. Frequency and repetition build habits.
Frequency over intensity.
Always. The hustle culture approach, the brutal 2-hour exhausting workout you force yourself to do on January 3rd, requires a massive expenditure of prefrontal cortex energy. You have to hype yourself up. You have to fight through the physical pain. You drain the battery completely.
And then you're exhausted.
And as we've clearly established, within 2 or 3 weeks, your dopamine habituates to the gym. The motivation vanishes, your battery is depleted from life stress, and you abandon the gym entirely.
You break the chain. You just stop going.
Yes. But the single push-up, doing one push-up requires almost zero PFC energy. You can do it when you are dead tired, when you're sick, when you are stressed out of your mind. And every single day you drop to the floor and do that one push-up, you are firing a specific neural pathway in the basal ganglia.
You are wrapping myelin around the wire.
Yes. The MBR is not about physical progress. It is about maintaining the architectural integrity of the habit.
You are basically keeping the train tracks clear of rust.
Exactly. By refusing to break the chain, even with an embarrassingly small effort, you keep the basal ganglia engine primed and running. So A month later, when the weekend comes and your PFC battery is fully recharged and the sun is shining and you actually feel like doing a full 1-hour workout, the systemic infrastructure is already there waiting for you.
You don't have to overcome the inertia of starting over. The single push-up protects the pathway.
That's it, exactly.
Okay, let's bring this all home. We have covered a massive amount of clinical, biological ground today. I mean, we've talked about dopamine traps, brain batteries, shrinking dendrites, and friction physics. If the listener takes nothing else away from this deep dive, take this. Stop negotiating with your feelings.
Absolutely. Your feelings are just transient chemical predictions. They are literally just dopamine neurons guessing about the future. They were designed by millions of years of evolution for immediate survival and short-term learning. They were not designed to help you write a novel or build a business or maintain a 10-year fitness routine.
Exactly. Relying on motivation to achieve your goals is like trying to fly a commercial airplane that only has fuel when the weather is perfectly sunny. The moment a storm hits the moment, stress or fatigue or a bad day arrives, the fuel vanishes and the plane crashes. You have to stop blaming yourself for the crash. You have to stop saying, I'm a bad pilot, and you have to start building an automated autopilot system that can fly the plane in the pitch black.
You know, I want to leave the listener with a final, perhaps provocative paradigm shift.
Let's hear it.
Throughout our lives, in literature, in movies, in culture, we are often told that treating ourselves like machines is a cold way to live. We are told that looking at human behavior through the lens of biology and systems is robotic, that it lacks humanity or soul.
Right.
But what if the exact opposite is true? What if understanding your neurobiological machinery is actually the highest possible form of self-compassion?
That is profound. Say more about that. How does biology equal compassion?
Think about what happens when you don't understand the machine. You fail to stick to a diet, and you call yourself a lazy failure. You berate yourself. But when you fully accept that your brain is a biological engine, an engine that is constrained by very real, unchangeable metabolic limits, an engine that relies on vulnerable dopamine receptors that get hijacked by phones, and a fragile prefrontal cortex that physically shrinks under stress, you completely remove the heavy, toxic moral judgment of failing.
You realize the game was rigged from the start.
Yes. You stop hating yourself for a perceived lack of willpower. You realize you aren't weak. You were just trying to use the wrong brain system for the job. When you embrace the machinery, you stop punishing yourself with guilt, and you simply, quietly, start redesigning your environment.
You fix the terrain instead of blaming your legs for getting tired. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much to everyone for taking this deep dive with us today. I want you to do one thing right now. Look around your immediate physical environment wherever you are listening to this. Look at your desk, your living room, your car, and ask yourself one question. What is the default option I have assigned to myself? If my battery dies in 10 minutes, what is the easiest thing for me to do in this room?
Because your basal ganglia is waiting in the dark to execute whatever's easiest. Your only job is to make sure the easiest path leads exactly where you want to go.
Remember, if you fall and break your arm, the x-ray shows you exactly where the bone snapped. And when you see that x-ray, you don't yell at the bone. You don't blame the bone for breaking under extreme physical pressure. You just accept the physics of the situation and you put a cast on it to support it while it heals. It is time we start treating our minds and our daily habits with that exact same level of structural, mechanical respect. Stop relying on the spark plug. Build your cast, engineer your friction, and let the engine do the work.
Your tools. It's the strength to build anew. It's the light to guide you through. It's the choice to find your way. Starting here, starting today.
We are going to wrap it up there for today. If you take one thing away from this episode, let it be this. Motivation is just a chemical state, and feelings are biologically unreliable. Stop expecting your exhausted future self to suddenly wake up with a fully charged battery of willpower. It is not going to happen. You need an engine. You need to build a system that operates completely independent of your mood. Take the friction out of your environment so your default choices are the right choices. If you are tired of relying on motivation that never shows up, the frameworks to build your baseline systems are ready for you. Head over to your journey, yourtools.com, or open the app and start removing the friction from your environment today. Be kind to yourself. You are doing better than you think, and I'll catch you on your journey.